everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Coffee Met Bagel. My name is Anis, and I will be your host for today. So I'm here with our Mosaic pastors, and we gathered questions directly from you guys. And so we're hoping this series will provide some guidance to people, single people in relationships, any type of guidance on engagement, marrying, dating, all the fun stuff. But before we jump into things, I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves. So if you could share your name, some context on your dating relationship experience, how long you've been married, and a fun question, how do you like your coffee? So can we start with Pastor Doug?
Hi, I'm Doug. I'm one of the pastors here at Mosaic. I serve as the discipleship and community groups pastor. I've been married for since 1996. So what is that, 23 years? No, 26 years? I'm sorry, 27 years. I'm so bad. I have two grown children. My son is 22, just turned 22 today. My daughter is just graduated from high school. So we'll be empty nesters. And my dating relationship was, before I became a Christian, I dated around quite a bit. Entered into a lot of relationships that were ungodly, unhealthy, very detrimental. But after I became a Christian, I just committed myself to really try to obey God and follow after His ways. And that's when I met Candace. I like my coffee black. Americano mostly, yes.
Yeah, I'm Dave. I've been married 12 years, and we have two little girls. So I think we dated my wife and I were friends before for a while, and so we probably dated about 9 months before we got engaged, something like that. I could be a little bit off, but we didn't date that long, but we'd known each other. We were friends for a while, and so we were together for about 9 months. I did have girlfriends before that, a couple of serious ones, but again, like Doug, a lot of that was before I met Christ, so that was a little bit different. And I like my coffee black too, but I like Splenda. And Doug just told me Splenda ruins your DNA, right?
Yeah, so they're saying it might not be. They're saying that sucralose is a little bit different. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So my DNA is ruined for the rest of my life. Because I drink a lot of Splenda.
Okay. Pastor Andre.
Hi everyone. My name is Andre. I'm one of the pastors here, and currently I serve the young adult community. And I am married to Nita. We've been married for a year and a half-ish now. Got married January of 2022. So I'm the youngest in terms of the marriage experience. And before we got married, Nita and I, we dated for 3 years. Half of which was long distance because we were, long distance during COVID. She was back in California. I was over here. So dated 3 years, been married. Now that whatever's left of that. And so, prior to Nita, I haven't really dated seriously. I'd say I've gone on dates with people, but Nita is like my first serious relationship. And so, and it's been great that I got to be married to her. And in terms of coffee, I actually like a drink that's called flat white. It's like a latte, but it's not as foamy as a latte. That's why they call it flat. So,
He's fancy. He's fancier than us.
So based on everyone's experience, it seems like, some people have more serious relationships, other dating experiences. But how would you define dating, just based on what your experience and what you're seeing in the world right now?
Yeah. Well, I'll start, and then maybe you guys could jump in. So it's difficult to define because dating is not in the Bible. And so we're trying to kind of come up with something using biblical principles, but there's no clear definition in Scripture. I would say that dating faithfully as you can in our American context is to be pursuing a relationship with a direction towards marriage. And so that doesn't mean that you're going fast or slow towards marriage. It doesn't, I think people have asked me in the past, how long should we date? There's nothing like that in terms of pace, but there definitely should be a direction. So it shouldn't be directionless. Dating is not for entertainment. It's definitely, there's a direction there, and that's towards biblical marriage. And so I would say that that's kind of what dating is, as faithfully as you can do it. Yeah.
Anything else to add on to that? before we kind of jump into our bank of questions?
I mean, I think for me, because when I think about like relationships and just how important they are and how essential they are in our life, we have to be very mindful, like what are we doing in this relationship with this other person? Because if you're friends, you just hang out and you can enjoy, get to know each other, and hopefully even deeply as friends, guys and girls and stuff like that. But I think when you start to enter into that dating thing, that's where you have to be very mindful of what you're coming together for, because dating only ends up in two things: either you break up or you're going to get married, right? And so if you could spare each other that kind of pain and that hurt, I think that'd be the best. So I would say biblical dating, even though there's no such thing as P. Dave says, there's no such thing as biblical dating. If you're going to date in a God-honoring way, is really to be able to have discerned beforehand if I'm supposed to be committing myself to this person for the purpose of marriage, versus what the world's dating is like just to have fun and just to hang out and just to spend time with someone that you like, but then maybe you won't like them. It's like, you end up hurting each other. So I would just say be very careful.
Yeah, I think that aspect of direction is important because, I think as I've talked to so many college students, so many young adults about this topic, you get a mixed group of people who say, I'm dating just to date, and it could end up anywhere, and it's almost directionless. They're just seeing what could come out of it. But then there are other groups of people who are looking at Christ as their end goal, marriage, and they're moving towards. It's not like they're putting unnecessary burden or emphasis. It's just that's just where they're walking. And I think that's very healthy, and I think that is something, if a young adult were to ask me, how do I date? That's one of the pieces I would probably say. Make sure you have direction in terms of you're moving towards Christ together. And the goal is marriage. But of course, things can happen in your relationship. If it doesn't, that's okay. But I think that direction is important.
And dating can be fun.
Yeah.
Should be fun. The most fun. Well, if it's not, you're in trouble. Yeah.
Then kind of leading into that, like for those who are currently dating and in a relationship, how do you recommend assessing that? In other words, how do you know if you're with the right person?
Well, how do you know if you're with the right person? There are a lot of answers to that, but maybe I'll just say one way that's kind of a false assessment, and then maybe the other guys could jump in. Just because you have conflict, it doesn't mean you're with the wrong person. Just because you're having difficult time, it doesn't mean that you made a terrible mistake. So I think that learning how to overcome conflict together, learning how to communicate with someone who's really different from you, those are some of the basics of the dating relationship. And so if you should expect those things to come up, and that shouldn't freak you out. There's a lot to say in terms of how to cultivate a healthy relationship. But I think that's one thing that maybe you shouldn't be too afraid of. Is don't feel like conflict means that you've made a mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to like how do you assess, we talked about this earlier, but there's so many facets to it, right? But I think two of the main things, at least that come out in my mind, is this. Number one is, I'm primarily addressing Christians. If you have a relationship with God, then there's a sense where you're walking forward in faith and obedience and a deep peace that this is the person you're supposed to be with. And if you don't have that, then that's what I would definitely say. Get a foundation with the Lord first, so you can assess, as I'm with this person, are we honoring God together? Are we really, living for the Lord together? And there's a peace that comes from that, and whatever may happen after that. But there's another thing where I know married couples who've been married for a long time, and they didn't necessarily feel like, oh, she's the one for me. But as they were sharing together as friends and talking about God's calling on their life, they actually saw together, like they had a very clear common goal that God was calling them, whether it be the mission field, whether it be, in a certain area of ministry, or whatever it be something that was very clear that both of them felt like, I'm going that direction too. And they said, well, then let's commit ourselves to each other and let's go down this path together, honoring God. So, I mean, for me, probably the most important assessment is like, how is your relationship with God? How is your partner's relationship with God? And is it really in line with the Lord bringing you together and leading you that way? But that's from a bit more of a Christian biblical perspective, right? And just relational suggestions, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. I think another aspect is kind of external affirmation. I feel like there could also be the aspect of community seeing both of you. And ideally, this community would be a community that knows you well as the boyfriend, the girlfriend, who's been walking with you. And I think from an outside perspective, if they can see that I see the same values, because I feel like oftentimes it could also be hard as the person in the relationship, wondering whether we have the same values, because like P. Dave said, there's conflict that rise up, all of the things like that. So I think another kind of gift I think God gives us to help us discern is the community. And the community being able to say, hey, we see both of you, we see the values, we see both of you going in this direction, and we think it's a good sign, and we think it's going the right way. So I think if you can have trusted people who are mature spiritually, who know you, who know both of you, and getting their insight as well, I think could be helpful. Again, I feel that's not the end all be all, but it's one of the tools that can be helpful.
Yeah, one thing that I've said that I think is really important is, can you guys have a spiritual relationship together? And so there are some people that you have a lot of fun with, and you are Christians, but there's not a lot of, it's hard to have a Christian relationship, and like to get into that spiritual substance is kind of awkward with some friends, and it feels like more intentional with other friends. If this is going to be the person that potentially you're going to marry, then that there should be the seeds of that, or like substantially it should be there, like to have those spiritual conversations. So I think that's like a really important ingredient, where spirituality is not foreign to you and your significant other, but it should be something in the orbit of, your relationship together.
Yeah, I think, also just kind of sharing on that, like, I don't know how everyone's relationship with their parents are, but if you have parents that are genuinely, if they're Christians and they're very prayerful, they're mindful, and, they get to know that person you're interested in before you make that commitment, I think that could be very helpful too, because, parents know their children, and parents get a sense of like, oh, this person is actually not just one to support, but my child can actually support them too. So you have some family input too. I know it might be difficult because, a lot of broken homes these days, but if you have that kind of relationship with your parents, I think they could definitely speak into the relationship to help you assess like, oh, this person is really good for you, and and give you encouragement and empowering along the way too. So. Yeah, I think because I'm Korean, we're Korean, right? The understanding in the Korean culture is don't introduce them to the parents until like you're at the later state of the relationship. But I don't know if that's the way to go. At least that's not the way it was in the ancient culture. It was much more early on the parents knew, and if anything, the parents are the ones who gave the approval, right? It's kind of flipped now where we're a little bit more individualistic. But again, I understand we're in a different situation, so yeah.
Yeah, I think also I want to also kind of clarify what I said, because I have friends who, they're married now, but when they were dating, everyone told them to break up, right? So there are cases like that, right? And I'm sure people who are listening are like, well, what if I don't have a community like that kind of, so what do I do then? But I also feel like something P. Dave said in a previous sermon, where he said, in a dating relationship, as well as if you're in a married relationship, are you willing to push each other to look more like Christ? And I think that's also one of the things I would say is so important, because let's say you're in a situation where the community around you is saying you guys should break up, and maybe it's valid reasons, but maybe both of you are like, but we still want to be committed to Christ, and we want to turn this over, and we want to make it a relationship that's been redeemed. I think if you can be committed to pushing each other towards Christ, to looking more like Jesus and forming each other that way, I think that could also be one of the signs, right? Because I think it's not so much about prove to me that you're the one, but I think it's more like, let me prove to your partner, to you, that we will be committed to Christ, and we can encourage and push each other to look more like Him, to be patient, to be loving, to be kind, to be understanding. And so, I want to mention that because I thought of all my friends who didn't get that, but now they do have a beautiful marriage.
Right.
And it's because they committed to that after all of it.
Yeah. And you're right. Some parents are like, don't get married. Like in the situation, my wife's family said that about us, but here we are together. So, yeah, I think that's why it comes for me. It's so important. Like when I do premarital counseling, and which is a very beautiful thing. I always ask them, like, what are the 3 reasons why you're coming together? And then they'll usually share. And often I get, personality, or they make me feel good, and I enjoy being with them. And those are all valid. Those are all good. But it's rare to hear where they go, I'm convicted that this is the person that God's calling me to commit my life to. Because when you go into a difficulty after you get married, and it's like the world is against you, and you maybe even against each other, what's going to keep you in that relationship, right? And hopefully, if you really have that conviction, like, it doesn't matter what we go through. God's called me to be committed to you. And of course, there is that marriage vow. But how much more that you actually feel that conviction, sense that conviction before you enter into a marriage, right? So you're not like going in just by feelings or by circumstances or by looks, but actually by deep conviction that God's brought you together. So you can stick it out when it gets difficult, so.
How would you recommend overcoming that challenge and conflict together? Because, you want to be able to communicate with each other, know how each person kind of faces conflict, deals with conflict. But as, a Christian, those in a Christian relationship, what would you recommend the best way to overcome that is? If you do, want to stay committed in that relationship and see it going forth.
I mean, that's a lifelong battle to try to figure out how your partner communicates and how to communicate back to your partner. It's really a lifelong journey to kind of learn. And then also your spouse changes, over time. But most people are not really great listeners. Most people are much more in position to argue than they are to listen. And if you know that about yourself, I think that working on that is really, really important, because I find a lot of people are in a posture of winning an argument rather than trying to understand the other person. So, I've done exercises where I've had couples try to repeat what the other person is saying back to them. And you'd be surprised how many tries it takes for them to echo what the other person is saying, even though they've said it a lot of times. And so, we're not really great listeners, and that's a skill that should be worked on in order for us to communicate well. The first part might just be learning how to listen first.
I think depending on what the conflict is or what the challenge is, I think those are great opportunities to discover like what's at the root of somebody's heart. Right? Because Jesus says, out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth speaks. So if something's coming out, say for instance, someone says to you, I don't want to have Thai, and all of a sudden you go, well, I want Thai, and you get super, super duper angry. Is it really because they're choosing Thai over something else, or is there something else going on inside? So when there's a conflict like that manifests, it's an opportunity to say, whoa, let's hold on for a second. What are we actually, where is this conflict really coming from? And so there's an opportunity to discover that. And maybe the deep down is like, you never respect what I am saying. Maybe that's what it is. And so if the couple can actually work on discovering the core things, there's definitely possibility to healing and understanding. But if it's just to placate like a surface level piece, that's going to be difficult later on because it never gets resolved. So there is definitely possibility to resolve conflicts and, exterior challenges and things like that. If each person is able to get deep into what's the core issues that are going on there. Yeah.
Like the root cause. You can just slap a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which kind of goes to the other side of listening, which is that a lot of people are not great communicators of what they're actually feeling, but they're more reactive to what's happening. And so in premarital counseling and in marriage counseling, I do talk about, what are the subterranean issues, meaning the underneath issues that she's saying this, but that's because of what's going on underneath. But you do have to be careful not to make too many presumptions about that kind of thing, because when people feel misunderstood, they react to that too. But if you listen well, and if you're prayerful, and you actually care, instead of winning arguments, over time, they do start to reveal themselves, like those subterranean issues. But it takes some patience, perseverance.
Yeah, I think in pre-engagement, we talk about winning the soul over the argument. And so, I think as your partner, if you have that in mind, that I'm not trying to win the argument like both these men said, but I'm trying to understand you, to love you, and to win your soul, I think we would have a different approach. Like, we wouldn't feel this victim mentality, because oftentimes I feel like in conflict, we feel like either our character is being attacked, we're not enough, or one of these insecurities, and that's why we try to defend ourselves. But I think if we understand we're on the same team, I think it covers, I think definitely that's where I see love covering multitude of sins really coming to life, because I'll be the first to say, in Nita and my relationship, I think we can forget sometimes we're on the same team. But taking a step back, realizing we're on the same team and we're in this together, that I think that helps too. And so, yeah, I think just practically for me, saying sorry. I have to get better at saying sorry, and taking that first step I feel like is always the hardest, but taking that step for me, I think it makes all the other steps so much easier with that initial step.
And if I'm understanding the question correctly, how do you overcome? I think some issues are core issues. For instance, like for me, core issue is salvation, is the gospel. If I'm engaged in a relationship with someone who does not believe in the gospel, who does not, believe in Christ, that's a core issue. If someone cracks corny jokes or maybe not that nice to a waitress or something, I mean, to me, that's not a core issue. That's something that hopefully we'll always be working on in a character. But I think that's in the relationship, you really have to know like what is core, essential, important for you, vital for you as a follower of Christ, and what is core, essential for that person. Because maybe those things are not supposed to be, can never be reconciled, or, in that sense. And at that point, you just go, well, this is not the season for me to be with this person because our core does not meet. Core essentials don't meet.
And going off of that, when do you know is the right time to leave? Say it is, a core issue problem, but is there anything else, or in experience of your past relationships, when did you know that it was time to?
You mean leave a dating relationship, right? Not get a divorce.
Yes.
I have no experience in that because Nita's my first, so take it away.
Yeah. Well, if you're dating, I think that it is important to start by realizing you're not married, right? And I do try to emphasize that marriage is that substantial, that you're two, and then right after those vows, you're one. But until God ordains that marriage, you're not married. So you do have the freedom to break up. And it's important because if you don't feel like you have the freedom to break up, a lot of times because of shame, but there are some real issues. And if you don't have the freedom to break up, then a lot of bad things can happen, and people can be kind of forced into a marriage. So I think it is important to know that until you're married, you're not married. And so you shouldn't act like you are. And so I've always told couples that Satan will try to make unmarried people act like they're married, and then make married people act like they're not married. And so we have to make sure that we honor God's word. There are a lot of core things to assess, and there are three things that I look for in a relationship. One is, do they have a shared vision for life? Secondly, can they overcome conflict consistently together? And then thirdly, do they have a shared faith? I think that if you've spent a significant amount of time with someone and those three things are not there even in seed form, you have to give yourself the option to leave, even if you're emotionally committed and you're still infatuated with this guy. You have to have sober-mindedness and make a decision. You shouldn't act like you're married if you're not.
Yeah. I'll give two real situations of people that I've counseled. So one couple, before they got married, they asked for counsel, premarital counsel. And as I was asking them what's their goal in life, and they're sharing, they both claimed to be Christians. They're both attending the church I was pastoring. But it became very clear that the gentleman's focus was starting his new business. And so he's telling me, like, give me all the signs, like, my focus is this new business. My time, my energy is and it became very clear that this lady's focus was she really wanted a lot of stuff. She wanted the bells and whistles because when she met him, he was working for a pretty prestigious company, but now he's off on his own. And I saw that, as you said, a shared vision. They didn't have a shared vision because his vision was, I'm going to start my business. It's not you, my priority, and not the family. Her vision was, I want a lot of stuff. I want an expensive name brand. It's not you. You're just the means to get it. So I told them, I said, you know what? I cannot say that you should never get married, but I don't think you should get married now. And they didn't listen, and they got married, and then later on, 6 months later, they came back with a horror story. And I don't want to go into that. So I saw that shared vision. Another one that I've seen very clearly is when they go into a relationship and they're expecting that person to change, even though they told you that they're not going to change. So for instance, the lady who got married to this, was before they got married, the guy says, I don't want to have kids. And she's like, oh, it's okay, you'll change, but I want to have kids. And I was like, hear him out, because what you're thinking is you're going to try to change him. You're expected to change him before you get married. So in other words, you don't accept him the way he is, but you're going to try to change him. And so sure enough, they got married, and she's in heartbreak because she wants a baby, but he hasn't changed. He told her straight out, I don't want to have kids. And so I guess you could say a shared vision, but it's also a shared family, a shared faith that they're not walking together. So when you see things like that, again, these essentials that you say, no, this is really important to me. One part may say, like, it's important that we go to see our family every holiday, and the other side goes, no, I don't ever want to see my family. Then you're going to have conflict after conflict when you get married. Can you save yourself from that? Yes, you can. You could just say, well, unless we deal with this, we're not going to go forward into marriage, or we're going to break up. Because once you get into marriage, you're there. You're in there now. So, yeah. Figure out your core essentials.
Yeah, and that question is so real because not only do I have friends who wrestle with that, but I had college students who would ask me, like, how do I step away from this relationship when it's so hard for me too? And I definitely think in moments like that, it's so easy to get like insular and internal and not want to have any other voice speak into you because of that shame aspect you mentioned. And that's why I guess I just keep mentioning like external community, but I think you as a couple are going to have to make space for other people to speak truth into that relationship, because if you don't, it's no different from an echo chamber, I think. And you're just echoing the shame that you're feeling. What if we break up? People are going to talk. I'm going to feel lonely, right? I'm not going to get this affirmation that I've been getting the past year. So it's really, really hard. But I think because it's so hard, we need support from our friends, people who know us, to speak truth into those moments. So if you're not even there and you're not willing to listen to other people, I think that shows, okay, you've built something for you where it's going to be that much harder for you to get out of because you're not even letting other people in. And so I think opening yourself up to could be a good practical first step.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, like, there's a term called missionary dating, right? So where somebody is a Christian and then starts dating somebody who's not a non-Christian. And they, of course, they're now emotionally attached. They're, time attached, financially attached. I mean, so much investment has gone into this relationship. And what they're actually saying, and this is what I heard before too, but what they're actually saying is, I love you, but not completely, because until you become a Christian, I can't really love you completely. So I'm going to keep actively working on you till you become a Christian. And, in God's mercy, sometimes after they get married, they become Christian. I mean, in God's mercy somehow. But, that's already from the get-go, you're not really accepting that person as they are, because you're thinking like, I'm going to marry this person, I'm going to change that person. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. And the Bible is very clear, do not be unequally yoked. So again, that's a faith right there. That's the application of faith, or you do share a common faith vision together. Because otherwise, think about it, you actually have two different lords under one roof. You as a Christian, you're claiming Jesus as Lord. Your spouse, who are they claiming as Lord? So you're living under a house with two different lords. And that's just a recipe for pain and misunderstanding and different direction. Yeah.
I actually had an opposite story of that, where a college student, she was so committed, but she was dating someone who was not a Christian. And she would always be like, why isn't he coming to church? Like, how do I change him? But funny enough, the boyfriend actually messaged me. And he said, how do I end this relationship? She's pressuring me way too much. So it's actually kind of like the flip side is not only will, like, if you're a Christian and you're trying to, like you said, flirt to convert the other person, right? But it doesn't work. It's also, it can go the other way too, right? If you date someone who's not ready, right, for this type of faith, they could also feel so burdened and so overwhelmed. Because I'm sure there are people listening who are like, my girlfriend, my boyfriend's a Christian, I feel that pressure, right? Yeah. So I think that pressure and mismatched values goes both ways. And so literally I had to be like, okay, you want me to, like, the guy was reaching out to me to help them break up. Because he was just, I can't live up to her expectations. And honestly, I respect him for that, because he was being true to himself and he was being honest with the struggle, so.
seems like a common word being kind of thrown in is shared vision. I'm curious, like, what everyone's shared vision was with their spouse or their partner before they got married, and has that changed, since marriage? Do you see yourself and your partner like actively working towards that shared vision? And how is that, really being manifested right now in your relationships?
I mean, I know that for Hime and I, we had a lot of talks about vision, and one of the things that she made very clear was it was not her vision to go overseas as a missionary, which was something that I was considering very, very seriously at the time. And I really respect her for that, because she said, no, that's not my calling, and I'm not going. And so she said, made it very, very clear. And so she said, if that's where you're headed, I'm not headed in that direction. And so we knew that our ministry was going to be here in the States, and it's going to be in Jersey, and we were going to be committed to the church and to the people in our lives, and to make our home a place where we can minister to people and to let people into our lives that way. And so the shared vision was really to do ministry together in a church setting, and to be here and to reach people in the States. And so I think he may have really helped to clarify even my vision in that direction. Yeah.
Hey Dave, what was that like? Because you're saying you felt this conviction to go this way, but Hime was clear also that that's not mine. So what was that process like of you just matching together? Did it feel like you were surrendering a conviction, or did it feel like actually through Hime God was clarifying your vision?
Yeah, no, definitely that, because if she was the first voice or the sole voice or the only voice who was saying that, I think that it would be a little too radical for me to say, because he may said, no, I'm not going, right? But in a long string of, like you were saying, working out my calling in community, I actually landed very close to the bullseye of pastoral ministry in the States. And then when I was pursuing Hime, she clarified it a little bit further. But yeah, if she was the first or only one, I think it'd be a little bit too much for me to say, that part of my vision is gone because I want to marry her, right? But she came at the tail end of kind of a long process of assessing that vision with community, which is an important thing. I knew I was called to ministry, but ministry could be a lot of different things, right? And so the community helped me a lot.
I think, just to be honest, I'm very selfish. And so I had a very clear vision for what God was calling me to do. Because I went into seminary, so I knew that God was calling me into pastoral ministry. And when I saw Candace, first of all, she's beautiful, so I got blown away just that she was there. But as I started spending time with her, I actually had a list of 11 things of what I was praying through daily, of what I was hoping that God would provide in a spouse. So I had a list. And as I was spending time with Candace, she hit every single one, except for one, and that's for a different story time maybe. But it was very clear that she was not only open to ministry, but that she actually was involved in ministry, because she was a Sunday school teacher, she was active, and that she was actually actively recruiting others to participate with her. That's how I started going to Young Knock, because she reached out to me and says, you want to come and help with the praise team? And of course, you go there? She's like, yeah, I'll go there too then. So I saw her. She already had a heart for ministry. And I think that's a wonderful way to start, relationships is, with other brothers and sisters in ministry, serving the Lord. And then she knew that I'm doing seminary, going to be a pastor. And so she understood, okay, following the pastor trajectory, you're not going to have a big house. You're not going to have fancy jewelry. You're not going to have these things. And she's okay with that. That's not what she has her goal. So it became very clear that our vision was very similar. And I tell her this all the time. I prayed a lot. I prayed every single day ever since I became a Christian for my future wife. And that's why I got Candace. And I told Candace, you didn't really pray for your spouse. That's why you got me. And so, and I tell her that, and just being completely honest. And so that was the discerning process for us. We both knew that we loved to talk about God together. We loved to do ministry together. We knew that our calling was to minister to the church. And so we were yeah, we're fully on board together. And if it wasn't for God, confirming it and convicting us, we wouldn't have been able to go through the, 3 years of her parents' rejection of me, but through it all, God really shaped us and held us firm. So, but that's how we assessed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in Nita and my case, I think we both had the same vision of we want to advance God's kingdom in our unique ways. So you could ask her. She had no plans to do any type of full-time ministry. But I mean, throughout her college and young adult years, she did serve college ministry at her church in New York City. But when it came to vocationally or anything like that, that was not in the picture. But as I got to know her, one thing I realized she did really care about was she wanted to showcase Christ at work. She wanted to showcase Christ with her coworkers. And she does that through how intentional she is with her relationships. And when I saw that, that's when I saw, okay, we share the same vision in that sense. It's not that we both need to do ministry, but it's that we both want to advance God's kingdom in our unique ways that God has gifted us. So for her, it's through just the type of people she's with through work. If it's through the type of gift she has, just being intentional with sisters, meeting up one-on-one, trying to be as encouraging as possible. For me, it looks like more of that vocational ministry route, right? Like discipleship, teaching, praying, counseling, stuff like that. And at first, that I thought our visions didn't line up because it didn't look the same. And that was some of the things in the beginning of my dating years. I really had to ask God, is this a shared vision? Because on the surface, it doesn't look like it because I'm always in church, whereas she's not. And so to me, in my head, I was like, oh, it doesn't look the same. But more that Nita and I we kept dating, I got to see her vision. I saw, oh, she's advancing God's kingdom like I am, just in different ways. And when I saw that and I was God opened my eyes to see that, I was like, we do share the same vision.
And I think that's important because most of the people listening are not going to be in ministry. I think it's important to see that it's, your common vision for life is not just your jobs, right? I mean, you can have completely different jobs, but a lot of vision comes down to values, right? And there are some vocational aspects of it, like if some person really wants to be a designer in Paris and the other person says, I hate Paris. Like, I will never go to Paris. I mean, there are some pretty stark decisions like that. But for the most part, it has to do with family and the values that you have in kind of building a life and what's important to you and what's not. One thing that comes up commonly that doesn't get talked about a lot is culture, right? Is what kind of culture do you want to build in your home? If you're from an immigrant culture, and we know that as Korean Americans, there's such a gradient of what it means to be second generation or third generation, and that comes with a lot of how you treat your in-laws, how you're going to raise your kids, and those things are important to talk about. And so a lot of it does come down to values and how you kind of see life playing out. And then as they talk, two things I would say to be careful of. If there's no God involved in their life construction, that should be something that is a red flag, right? Because that should be really core to your relationship. But the second red flag is a lot of people know how to say the right answers, especially when you're in the dating phase, because that's when you're on your best behavior. You're kind of interviewing to get married kind of thing, right? But watch their life, right? There are people who will say, I want to become wealthy so that I can give a lot to missions. And they're not a generous person, I just know that people especially who have been churched, know the right answers. But it's important to see kind of how their life is, because you might get bamboozled if you're not kind of watching carefully to those things. Yeah.
I think more and more I discovered, and just to be honest, like when I courted Candace and we got married, it wasn't like, oh, my marriage is going to reflect the profound mystery of Christ in the church. It wasn't like that. It was like God called me to, convicted me to be with her, and she's going to be my wife, and I commit to her. But the more and more, as I've been married, as I've been counseling couples, I realized, the greatest joy and honor that a couple can have is that when people look at our marriage, they say, oh, I really see something different. in your relationship. And hopefully that difference is that we're actually reflecting, as Ephesians 5 says, that profound mystery of Christ in the church. Like, they look at our marriage and go, wow, as a husband, you really do love your wife and sacrifice everything for her. And as a wife, wow, you really do submit to your husband in all things as to the Lord. And there's this beautiful, like, covering and, mutual submission. And I think, again, regardless of, like, occupation, is that really what's the deep root of the heart? Like, in our relationship, I want us to really reflect Christ to others around us and be a blessing to our friends when we hang out with them, and to our parents, our children, So yeah, occupation is very, very secondary. It's more of the value, culture, the core of what's in the heart, of each person there, in the relationship.
So I'm going to move on to a more, I guess, spicy topic. How do you communicate, or one of the questions that we received is it really that bad to have sex before marriage? So kind of in relation to that, like, how do you communicate physical boundaries, like, as a Christian couple, what are some sort of ground rules, I guess you could say, in physical relationship too, not just spirituality and,
Well, I'll start, you guys could jump in. I think the first part was, is it really that bad? And, well, it depends. From kind of a biblical law perspective, it's not any more damning than anything else, right? But I think that we can feel existentially that there's something specially damaging about it, right? Because I think that there's an element of shame and a deep hurt that comes from sexual sin that maybe you don't feel in a couple of other areas. So I wouldn't say it's any more damning than anything else, but I think you're going to feel it maybe more than anything else. I think that there is that aspect to consider. I mean, Paul would say in 1 Corinthians, it's because there's a spiritual connection that God has engineered into sexual activity that he says, don't you know that if you sleep with a prostitute, that there's a spiritual unity that happens when you do that, and that's why you feel like that the day after, right? And so I think that there is something spiritually and existentially that is pretty deep in it, and that's why we feel like that when we have sexual sin. I mean, I've talked to so many people who've experienced that shame, and I think it takes a lot to convince yourself that it's not that bad, right? There is some brainwashing that you need to do to yourself to say that feeling that I'm feeling, it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, I also think culturally wise, it's really challenging because in our day, sex is seen as something just so, I don't know, something that's not so special. It's like you could just sleep around, it makes no difference, no ramifications. So I think that's kind of like, where we see like the devaluation of sex. But sex is such a tremendous gift from God. And it was supposed to be enjoyed in the context of a covenant marriage, where you give yourself of the most intimate part of yourself to one another. And there is this not only of exposure, but of protection. Like, I'm covenanted to you. But outside of covenant marriage, like, I could just leave the next day. What's the level of commitment that I have to do except my word, right? In that sense. And so there's a lot of things that do happen. And there is definitely a soul attachment, which is what Paul, PJ was talking about Paul, because you actually become one with somebody when you sleep with them, right? And so what ends up happening is you have this heart or your soul that's been torn apart. And then when you finally come to that person that you want to wed, that you want to covenant to, you kind of give them this broken part. And of course, God is merciful and gracious. But what ends up always inevitably happening is there's flashbacks of people that you have been with, because it's very difficult for us to forget. And you're not able to, again, but in God's grace and mercy, you can, but it's not the kind of purity and enjoyment and holiness that you would be able to enjoy if you didn't do that with somebody else. Right? And vice versa. I mean, I always ask this question, like, to young people, how would you feel if your dad, slept around with a bunch of women before he met your mom and your mom never did? How would you feel about your dad? And every single one goes, man, what's wrong with you? Why couldn't you keep it in the pants, And it's because you sense this sense, like, not only the sacredness of your mom, but the sacredness of sex. You see, within us, there's something that says, like, yeah, you should have reserved that for mom because you value mom. right? As a child, you go, mom is precious. You shouldn't have done that with other women. And also you value your dad, right? So in a sense, that's what happens. You know, we could kind of play it off and culture keeps, downplaying it, but because God created us this way, there's this sense inside of us as a brokenness when we continue to engage in that outside of marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of what you said about the morning after. Keller, in Meaning of Marriage, he talks about how you just committed something that was so intimate with your partner that night, right? But then, and it almost feels like you did something that now is unbreakable. You did something that you experienced all of each other, right? And I think that's what sex is. It's almost like you give all of yourself in every way. Not only do you give your body, but you give your mind to it, you give your heart to it, your affections, your emotions. And so I think sex is one of the ways God has allowed us to give all of ourselves to someone, right? And that's why I think when you mentioned covenant marriage, that's you give all of yourself and you're satisfied and fulfilled. But then if you're not in that type of relationship, it's the morning after, like what keeps that person to stay there the morning after? It's almost like, you did something that was so intimate, but now it's just over and it's over with. And so I think that's why Keller mentions in there that, is it so bad? Like P. Dave said, it's not going to take you to hell any more than something else will, but in the sense that you don't enjoy it to the fullest capacity. I think that's where it hurts us. And so that's something that I found out.
What's interesting is I'm a little bit older than you guys, so if you watch movies like back in the 70s and 80s, and there'll be those scenes, in the movie where they meet up at a bar or something, and then they'll sleep, whatever, and the next morning, either the guy or the girl tries to come out of the bed really quietly, and sneak out without being noticed, because they did something, and the sense is you're supposed to stay, and you're supposed to, commit, but now they don't want to, and they want to get out, and there's a kind of sense like, oh, I'm kind of walking away, trying to escape the embarrassment. But movies these days is more like, yeah, we sleep and we just walk out. It's like, as time progresses, culture just keeps pushing this boundary of saying it doesn't matter. Sex is nothing. And that's the sad part, because sex is, again, such a gift from God. It's a sacred thing from the Lord. And we really cannot truly enjoy it unless in the context of covenant marriage, because you actually give yourself fully, and you're fully given to, and you're fully, protected in that covenant. So, yeah, I would just encourage people, do you really value what sex is? Do you understand the value of it? And it's also given to procreate. So, a whole lot of stuff comes out from that too, right?
Yeah, I think you have to kill something in yourself to make it light. Right? You really have to make something die inside of you to make it just a fun activity. But your question, one of the other questions you had was, how do you draw boundaries? And I would say one of the things is to plant your flag early, is to talk about it early, and to have other people, hold you accountable. But planting your flag early, that's really important, because as you get deeper into a relationship, it gets harder and harder to plant a flag. And so early and aggressively is a good way to protect yourself, because you're worth it. You're worth protecting. And so I would say that do it early and aggressive.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. I think, I hope this doesn't sound chauvinistic, but I would appreciate, and I think it would be very respectful for men in the relationship to set very clear boundary in the beginning. I'm very much attracted to you physically, and I know the danger of what will happen if I spend too much time alone with you. So what I will do, because I care for you and I honor you, and this is because I have a daughter, and I would really respect the man that would say this to my daughter and say, so when it comes to certain activities, I will be sure that whatever, we're not alone, we're nowhere near a bed or a couch, whatever, and I'll be very, set that, like you said, set that, flag very early and very clear, and it'll be on the impotence of both, of course, the party, but really for the man to stand and say, because I respect you, and because I honor you, and because I see you as a daughter of God, then, I will draw these boundary lines, And I would have mad respect for that man. Mad respect for that man. I tell you, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many boundaries because, I've been with Nita married 2 years now, and all my closest guy friends, whenever I would be with her, I would say, hey, text me every 30 minutes. Give me a call, do something, right? Because that's what I need. But also, I would encourage all the brothers who are watching. I think we play this game of how close can I get to the line of sinning without sinning. I think it's a very dangerous line, just because I've rarely seen anybody who can get that close to sin and not fall into it. And so I'd say, rather than having the mindset of like, okay, if this is the line and that's sin, how close can I get to not, rather than having that kind of mindset, I would say like, how can I get as far away from it as possible? So whether that's dating community, like you guys said, being together outside, staking your flag, I think those are all helpful ways. So I think we need to forfeit that idea of, I can get close to sin, but without sinning. I think we should forfeit that idea and try to I think that's the whole point of boundaries, right? So that we don't get there, but we have things that will prevent us from getting there. And so, yeah. And other boundaries I think are, I don't know, some of you guys just pray together before you like be in the same room. I don't know. I'm just anything, right? I think I like what you said. You kind of have to be vicious with it. Do anything and everything you can so that you're constantly in a place of like, this we need to protect this. Like I have friends who will worship together. Now I don't know, you could say that's extreme or what, but for them, that's what it takes. Like they worship together before they do anything, just them two, because, they're afraid of what could happen. And I respect it. If that's you and that's what you need, go ahead and do it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's great, because if you approach it just from a fear or prohibition standpoint, there's nothing that's going to make you want to do it more. But to go in that positive direction and to say we're going to pursue Christ together and building that culture of loving Jesus together, it's going to feel a lot more natural to get protection that way than to be obsessed with prohibitions. That's not really how we work. So I like moving in that positive direction more than being obsessed with boundaries too much.
Kind of taking that into my next question. Say you did cross that line, Pastor Andre, like you were talking about. You did cross that line and you feel this shame. How do you overcome that together as a couple?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the first thing is to try to overcome it together. Both people are going to feel it a little bit differently. But you need to run to the gospel, because there's no amount of law that's going to heal it. So going to the gospel and receiving that forgiveness and understanding that that's the exact moment that Satan's going to tell you can't go to God. Right? That's the exact moment when you have to hide from God because he hates you now. Recognizing those lies and running directly at, I think I preached a sermon on this, and I talked about Shark Week and how in Shark Week the cameraman was asked, what do you do if the shark starts attacking you? And he said there's only one thing you can do, is you just swim directly at the shark. And for everything else in the ocean, the shark realizes that it swims away from the shark, but here's something that's swimming directly at me, and it triggers something in the shark that says, okay, this is not prey, but it's a predator. And in a lot of ways, sexual shame, you have to swim right at the gospel, because there are going to be too many things telling you can't go to God. But it's actually those moments where you're going to feel and experience the gospel most powerfully. And so it's really, really important to go to the Lord in repentance and receive that forgiveness and receive all those things that you see Jesus dealing with women in sexual sin in the Gospels. That's what he's like. And to trust the Word. And Jesus said, when you look at me, you see the Father. But we have a picture of the Father that the day after, he hates you, he's mad at you, he's going to damn you. But Jesus says, stop and look at me. When you see me, you see the Father. There's forgiveness. And you have to go to the gospel right away. From there, you can have those conversations with your significant other, but that's a real battle to swim right to the gospel. Yeah.
I think thing about sin and shame. Shame is the thief of intimacy. And so what happens is when you commit that sin, you feel so shameful that you kind of want to hide away, just like Adam and Eve did, right? And the Bible is very practical too. It says this: In James chapter 5, it says, and the prayer of faith, so if anyone's sick or anyone has sinned, the prayer of faith will save the one who's sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sin, he will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power and is working. So this is specifically talking about people who are sick or have sinned. Go to the elders and they'll pray for you. So the elders, first and foremost, have to have a posture of being able to really pray and, and give the grace of God, distribute that grace of God, or whatever you call it, to the ones who sinned. But the one who sinned has to be willing to also confess. And so Jesus says, if you committed a sin against your brother and bring your gift to the altar, lay the gift at the altar and go first make it right, and then come back and present the gift. So I think the first thing you would do is confess to each other and say, I sinned against you. The boyfriend and girlfriend, I sinned against you by doing this. And then, next I would say was to keep accountable, because it's so easy to say, I'm sorry, and then do it again. Because we've all done that, right? And so now when you go to the elders and you share that, hopefully the elders will actually be able to pray for you, extend the grace to you so you know you're forgiven, but then you take the actual practical steps again, setting the flag and saying, okay, how do we fall into this? And how do we keep ourselves from falling into this again? So that would be the way. And shame hates it when it's exposed. Because actual exposure kills the shame. Right? The sin's already forgiven. Right? The sin is forgiven not because we say sorry. The sin's forgiven because of the cross. He's already forgiven us. But we are able to walk in that forgiveness, that freedom, when don't let it keep us in shame anymore. So you want to expose that, and I don't think you should go to the whole church and stand up and go like, guys, I gotta confess something, I saw my boyfriend. Like, that's not wise, because not everyone is privy to know that, but definitely the leadership that is trustworthy and spiritual, and they will pray for you, and, so that they can affirm the forgiveness, and you can walk in that righteousness. It doesn't mean it's the end of your relationship either, just because
Yeah, no, I love that, and I want to add to that, because I think Psalm 51 comes to mind, because that's like right there, that's what you see. You have a man of God, right, who fell into sexual sin. And this is kind of like, to our viewers who are Christian, I think what P. Duck said is so true. You're already forgiven in Christ. You just got to go to Him. You need to accept that and believe that for yourself. But what I've noticed in specifically Christians is that there's this another layer where they can't forgive themselves for the sin. So they're like, I know I'm forgiven by God, but I can't forgive myself. And what I want to help our Christian brothers and sisters see is that that's also pride right there. Like, the fact that we tell ourselves, I can't forgive myself, is actually very arrogant in light of God saying to you, you're forgiven. Because then we take a look at everything Jesus did for us and we say, that's great, but that's still not enough to win me over, that I can forgive myself. And so that's why I think it's so amazing that we have the gospel that we can run to, that Jesus yells through His life, through His sacrifice, you're forgiven. And once we see that, we can take a look at myself and say, I'm forgiven, right? And I can enjoy that, and I can love that. And I also love that it doesn't mean that your relationship is over either, because I definitely grew up in a very legalistic church growing up, and it was almost like, oh, you fell into sin? That's over for you guys. But I think if that's, I think it takes wisdom, right? Obviously, if it's a habitual thing and you just can't draw boundaries, I get it. But I think the gospel also provides so much redemption for both of you as a couple to grow in that way, and for you to be transformed, both of you individually. And so I love that it's not like you fell, it's over for you, but now it's, let's go back to Christ individually now together, and let's see what God can do with this redeemed relationship.
That's an important assessment period, right? If you fell and you're repeatedly falling and you're trying to draw boundaries and the other person doesn't respect that, then you have to kind of think about, how does he love me? How does she love me? Does she really respect me? And they might kind of paint it as, but I'm so ravished by you that I can't stop myself. But it's actually a deep selfishness, manifesting itself, right? Because she doesn't really love you to that degree. He doesn't really love you to that degree, right? So that's actually an important time for assessment. If you're trying to draw boundaries to protect yourself and the other person is not willing, I think that's an important moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that even goes to verbal abuse or negative talk. If someone's always you're in a relationship and they're always oppressive with their words, they're not really edifying you. I think they can say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and they keep doing it again. It's like Pete Dave said, like, it's good to take an assessment. He goes, "You know what? Maybe we take a break. Because you're not married yet. Take a break, and then you take a moment to assess yourself and figure out, like, why do you always keep talking down to me? And then why do I always feel like I'm not being edified by you? What kind of relationship am I entering into, right?" So I think that's good, and it kind of gives a stark reality, like, oh, this person is not going to accept me acting this way. And so I have a choice. Either I address it or I walk away. Again, self-disclosure. So Candace and I, when we were in our courtship, early stages, we were in an argument. We were on a date and going out together, and we got into an argument. And during the argument, she turned her back on me, and I slapped her in the butt. I didn't hit her hard, but it was definitely out of anger. And then she turned around and she looked at me. She goes, "You ever touch me again, it's over." And I'm very thankful that she said that, because one, it kind of startled me, like, what am I doing? I never touched a girl before. Why am I doing this? And so I kind of had to go do a little bit deep assessment, like, oh, I got some anger and forgiveness issues. But the other thing was, it helped me to realize, like, oh, she's serious. Like, if I don't respect her this way, she's gone. And so I got to make a choice. Either I address this issue and this weakness in my character, or I'm going to have to say goodbye to her. And so I'm thankful she did that. And so in a certain sense, because you're not married, when you get married, it's a different story, right? Now you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this guy or this girl I'm married to? But when you're dating, you can actually make a pause and say, hey, let's reassess this and what's going on in your heart. And if you can't keep touching me when I ask you to stop, or even when I don't ask you to stop, then you need to really reassess. So in a sense, you have to put boundaries down, right? Red flags too. Yeah. Those are some red flags. Absolutely. Yeah, if my daughter was dating somebody and the guy comes and says, "I can't stop touching you, I can't stop," I'll be like, I think maybe you need to take a break. Just let this guy go through some counseling or something to figure out what's going on in himself. But that's good.
So we're going to hop into the last question, just to kind of wrap things up. So how old were you when you got married? We kind of addressed this earlier, but just recap. How old were you when you got married, and what is a piece of advice you would give to yourself back then?
Wow.
I'll go, since I've been married the longest. So I got married when I was 25. I actually wanted to get married when I was 22, but for 3 years, my wife's parents said no. So we had to really work through that, pray through that, and God's grace came through. If I can go back and tell myself something, it would definitely be this, like, don't lose your relationship with Christ. Like, you have to really guard your intimacy with Christ, because out of that flows everything else. So, my wife knows too, like, when I'm walking with Christ, like, I'm the best husband. Or, maybe not the best, but getting better husband. But when I don't walk with Christ, I'm just me. And I'm not a very good me. So that's what I would tell myself. And I tell myself that now too. But even more so, like, really protect your intimacy with the Lord, and then you will protect your family. Yeah, that's what I would tell myself.
Yeah, maybe I can go. I got married when I was 26. So it's fresh in my mind. I think I would tell myself, I would say, experience a lot of each other's passions. That's probably something I would do more of, because I think what's beautiful about marriage is that you get to experience so much together, right? More than you can even imagine for the rest of your lives, and you learn more and more. But I think for me, I didn't do that part of that dating period where still I wanted to really get to know Nita. I felt like I was lazy in getting to know her, and I feel like I didn't put in that type of effort. So for me, it would still be get to know what Nita loves more and more, and be intentional about it, rather than in this dating period getting comfortable and saying, all right, she's already mine, it's already gonna happen, so why try? For me, it's I just hear Nita's voice, like, you should have tried more. So for me, it's like, put in that effort still. Like, don't get comfortable. Like, if anything, like, invest more, get to know what she loves more, get to enjoy and love God more together, instead of getting lazy and comfortable.
Yeah, I got married when I was 27, I think. And I think there's so many things I would tell myself. I made so many mistakes, but I think one of them might be your insecurities are killing you. You think that it's her, but your insecurities are making it so hard for you to love her, because you're too desperate to you're too desperate because of how insecure you are. And I think that was the root of a lot of what I was doing, that was making things difficult. Because I didn't realize they were my insecurities. I thought that they were failures of things that are going on around me. So I don't think I was very self-aware.
Can I say one more?
Yeah.
If I can go back in time, I would tell myself, don't worry so much about money. I think because I was in ministry, and a lot of times we would really be in the red, so we would worry about money. But it's one thing to not have money and worry. It's another thing to not have money and not worry. So realizing now, like, again, that God is faithful, and you're not going to starve, obviously. Still budget, still be mindful of the way you use the things that God gives to you, but don't be so anxious about money. That's what I would tell myself. Yeah, because God is faithful; He provides. Yeah.
Well, that is it for our first podcast episode. Wow. Thank you, Pastor Doug, Pastor Andre. So thank you everyone for tuning in to our first episode. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you want this series to continue. Thank you everyone for your time, and see you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.